My name is Tom Lollar, and I am at the gallery at the New York Institute of Technology in New York. I'm going to be discussing the exhibition that is currently on display, inspired by my time at the American Academy in Rome. I'm interested in ancient maps. I studied the ancient Severan plan of Rome. It was a marble map, 40 by 60 feet, and it was in the Forum. It was from the 3rd century, and it depicted every ground floor room in the city of 1 million people. Ancient Rome in the 3rd century had 1 million people. What happened with the map is it collapsed during an earthquake in the 9th century, I believe, and fragments exist of the map, and fragments that are depicted like this. The map collapsed. People dragged away fragments, used them to construct buildings and used them for other purposes, and they were kind of forgotten about until the Renaissance. And in the Renaissance, some of the fragments were found, and it reawakened an interest in what the plan of Rome was. That people for hundreds of years have been living around ruins, but now they could see from some of the fragments what existed between the ruins that were still visible. I was fascinated with this map and went to the Vatican Library and looked at drawings from the 16th century of the map and decided to create clay and marble fragments inspired by the map but not copies. So here is the Piranesi print of the some of the existing fragments. Only 10% of the map really exists today in these fragments. Some are very large fragments, some are as small as 5 by 5 inches. And on my left here are some of the ceramic fragments based on the marble plan. So they have again, they're glazed with a glaze that gives the feeling more of bronze than marble, but they're stoneware ceramic fired to about 2,400 degrees. Here you see the Tiber coursing its way through these tablets. And then I've taken some of the visual iconography from the tablets and recreated it in my tablets. Here's an aqueduct going through. And then I've taken and depicted buildings in silhouette. Here's St. Peter's, and playing around with the flatness of a map and the idea of showing buildings in profile. Again, a glaze like this is wonderful in that every line carved into the clay is picked up in the final glaze firing. So they look, in a sense, when I'm creating them, they kind of look like etching plates because they're flat and they're drawn, they're fired, and then dipped in the glaze, and the glaze, again, picks up every fine line. I took the idea of the tablets and played around with the different techniques. And in this tablet, there's an extreme example of the idea of dimension. I've taken and depicted some of the drawings, again, of the map itself, but then I have things popping out of the map. Here's a triumphal arch that's popping out. Here's Trajan's column that's sort of coming at you, and here's a flat version of the Colosseum. I took the idea of the maps and this is what really that made marble maps as well. This is really close to what the actual marble map looked like. It was very low relief. It was carved in marble, as I said, and the wall that it was installed on 2,000 years ago exists as an exterior wall today. If you walk on the outside of the Forum next to the church of Cosimo and Damian, Saints Cosimo and Damian, you can see to the left of the entrance a wall with a grid of holes in the wall. And those holes would have been the holes that held the clamps that held up the marble plan. So it's interesting, what was an interior wall 2,000 years ago is now an exterior wall, but you can see the memory of where the plan was. And there's excavations happening below where the marble plan was installed, finding fragments of the old marble plan. Then moving along, I took the idea of the fragments and made various versions of them. And here you have glaze. This one obviously is a transparent kind of glossy glaze. At the top band, this is Ostia, which is the port of Rome. And this is Ostia here with the Tiber coursing through into this next tablet where you're in Rome. But here at the top of each tablet, you have kind of a panorama of Ostia and Rome. Then taking the same idea, you have a fragment here that gives the appearance, the memory of once being installed. You see there's a hole here that gives the impression that this was actually installed somewhere. So you get a feeling of that. I included a working map of my ideas because I wanted the students here at the Institute of Technology to kind of see how an artist formulates an idea and how an original idea can be realized in a number of different ways. This is a map of Rome today. It's a wonderful map that I blew up into these digital copies that shows in profile the buildings. So I made a mark to where my apartment I rent in the Esquiline Hill, and also a circle around the American Academy, and kind of drew where I would walk from the Esquiline through the Campus Martius, across the Ponte Sisto, up to the Academy. So this really, what seems like a very long walk, is really easily done within an hour and a half through some of the most interesting city fabric you can imagine. So I include this, and then I decided this is the first idea of maybe putting on top of the map itself an actual building in profile. So this is a triumphal arch that was sort of quickly sketched to give the idea of what would this look like carved on top of a clay map. Here are other versions. I decided really these are the first two of the turquoise stoneware maps that I did a few years ago. This was done right after coming back from the American Academy the first time that I was there as a visiting artist. And what I've done here is try to make the stubs of columns in relief. So I extruded these stubs. So you get, this is a diptych where they fit together, and you see the streets kind of correspond to one another. Here's a depiction of the Colosseum and what was actually next to the Colosseum. You know, there were apartments next to major buildings. Next to the Colosseum is a mini sort of gladiator training ground where it's been excavated. You can see this sort of mini amphitheater that would have had a tunnel going from it into the Colosseum. So the gladiators could be trained there. Then one day, I was walking with a colleague along the Tiber, and a shiny thing washed up, and we bent over and picked it up, and it was an ancient coin with Hadrian on it. And so I turned to my colleague and said, and look, the ancient world is still speaking. And so that inspired me to make what I call coins. And these are these discs that are large. In fact, yesterday in my studio, I made some that are this big. So like the coin idea is going to blow up into big medallions. And then Ricardo Arango, who is a master welder, a sculptor as well, did the welded surrounds that have a texture not unlike the edge of a coin, the kind of dots you see on the edge of a coin. So these are coins with ancient figures and actual buildings on them. There's one of the Colosseum, and then a temple up here. And then these are, I call these clay postcards. This is a memory of Rome. And then the curator, Jennifer Mitchell, it was wonderful to have her eye in my studio picking things out, because it never would have occurred to me to include this map of Berlin. But people have commented that it is a wonderful compliment, because the glaze technique is very different. This is a map of the Tiergarten area of Berlin with the old Reichstag building. And then Jennifer picked out the fragment of Manhattan, and there's a postcard here of the Berlin Cathedral during the time of the Hohenzollerns, which was the royal family of Germany in the early 20th century. Continuing on, this is a vessel with, I took the idea of the flat map format and wrapped it around a cylinder, so I've created vessels that actually have maps on them as well. And then the final end of the map series has a amalgam of maps that relate to a number of cities, mostly ancient cities. This is Rome-Ostia during the time of Pope Gregory. So you have a coin here that's carved, and then you have the ancient city in relief. This is another ancient city, and then this is a destroyed city, the city of Probus. Probus was a Roman emperor, and then you see where my students particularly like doing these projects because I let them help me. We take a map, various maps of cities, and I let them bomb them. So they drop pieces of stone on them, and this randomly has destroyed areas of the city. And then here's London in 1920. I was testing a glaze on this to see if it would read as clearly as the turquoise glaze. In the very front, the very first exhibit, as you come into the gallery, there are 4 objects that are similar yet dissimilar, and I want to spend a minute talking about those. On the way to the display, we'll pass another fragment, and this is perhaps one of my favorites. This depicts the Basilica of Constantine and Maxentius. It exists in 3 huge barrel-vaulted and coffered structures. You see it from a distance, it's enormous, but it only really gives you a hint of the scale because you're only seeing 1/3 of it. 2/3 of it collapsed. So if you can imagine this building, here's 3 huge vaulted spaces, and corresponding to it were 3 more huge vaulted spaces, the same size, and there was an enormous barrel vault that connected these vaulted spaces. And on the other end of it was an enormous statue of Constantine, of which you can see fragments in the Capitoline Museum. If you go into the courtyard of the Capitoline Museum, there's a huge marble arm, there's the head, and we're talking about a head the height of this room, and huge feet, a foot, or perhaps they're a couple of feet. So we can get a sense of the enormous scale of the statue by just the fragments, but it stood in this building. And then moving on to the final display. This display, I really like the way Jennifer put this together because I never thought of these pieces relating together, but they relate together pretty nicely, I think. So imagine you're living in Rome in one of the spaces that I've designed here in my maps, and I imagine that perhaps boxes like this in the red-black terracotta, kind of like Greco-Roman ceramics would have been, might be boxes that one would have in a home in ancient Rome. And in fact, there were interesting vessels created in bronze primarily that would hold women's toiletry items. They're beautiful, huge canisters that were used for toiletries. So even though these are not large, they're boxes that seem to relate to antiquity. And on the side, you see I've done postcard views of Rome. Here's the Pantheon, here's the Colosseum, and here's the column of Trajan in a sgraffito. I'm very interested in expressionist drawings, and so these have kind of a German expressionist look. This is a map of Dresden in 1945, and again, you can see the bombed areas. I've always been interested in ruins and how what is destroyed exists next to what is presently there. Here's another box with the Pantheon on the top. Opens like this. There's a profile of Hadrian. And then a number of years ago, I did a series of sinking Titanics, and this shows one where it's on its way down, obviously.